Welcome to the Crow's Tavern. Tonight, we'll journey back to the time of the Norse people, exploring their villages, customs, and daily lives as we drift toward peaceful sleep together. After our story ends, you'll hear the gentle sounds of a crackling fire that will continue for hours without interruption. These soothing sounds will help guide you into a deep and restful sleep. Now let us begin our journey into the Viking world and allow the ancient tales to carry you towards slumber. The first light of dawn traced silver patterns across the surface of the northern sea, marking the beginning of an unusual day. Njord, lord of winds and shores, stood upon his white sand beach, watching the gentle waves lap at his feet. Unlike most mornings where he would be attending to the prayers of fishermen or guiding ships through treacherous waters, today held a different purpose. In his hands he cradled a gift, a spiral conch shell the size of a shield, its surface iridescent with colors not found in mortal realms, collected from the farthest western shores where the sun sinks into the ocean. "It is time," he murmured to himself, his voice carrying the rhythm of tides. Today was the eve of one of Aegir's legendary feasts, when gods and spirits from across the 9 realms would gather beneath the waves in celebration. And while such gatherings were typically preceded by grand gestures and competitive gift-giving among the Aesir and Vanir, Njord had chosen something different. A gift of peace and tranquility, a conch that captured the serene silence of dawn tides. Njord's beard, white as sea foam and braided with tiny shells and pearls, fluttered in the breeze as he closed his eyes, attuning himself to the vast expanse of water before him. Though master of shores and winds, he was not a deity of the deep oceans. Those belonged to Aegir and his wife Ran. To deliver his gift personally would require passage through their domain, a journey few gods undertook willingly, unless invited to the famous feasts. "Father," the voice came from behind him, melodic and flowing. Njord turned to see his daughter Freya standing at the edge of the tree line where his white sand beach met the coastal forest. Golden-haired and clothed in a gown that shifted between green and blue like shallow waters, she approached with curiosity in her eyes. "You intend to travel to Aegir's realm yourself?" she asked, her gaze falling on the conch shell in his hands. Surely a messenger would suffice. Njord shook his head, his expression serene yet determined. Some gifts must be delivered by the giver's own hand. The magic within this shell is bound to me, to my breath, my voice, my intent. Only I can present it properly. He ran weathered fingers across the conch's spiraling surface, and it seemed to hum faintly in response. Besides, it has been too long since I ventured into the deep places. Freya's expression softened with understanding, though concern still lingered in her eyes. "The depths are strange to you, father, and not always welcoming to visitors, even those of divine blood. Aegir's realm follows different rules than ours. All the more reason to remember them," Njord replied with a gentle smile. "Fear not, daughter. The sea and I have an understanding that predates even the oldest of Odin's wisdom. I will return before the feast begins tomorrow." He kissed her brow, then turned back to face the ocean, his form already beginning to shimmer with magic as old as the first tides. Freya watched as her father waded into the shallows, the water seeming to rise eagerly to meet him. With each step, his form became less solid, more like light filtering through clear water, until he slipped beneath the surface with barely a ripple. Only the faintest gleam of the conch shell remained visible for a moment, before that too disappeared into the depths. Beneath the waves, Njord felt the familiar embrace of water against his skin, transformed now through his divine nature to be as breathable as air. His white robes billowed around him as he descended, leaving the sun-dappled shallows behind. Light filtered through the water in shifting beams, growing dimmer as he sank deeper, his descent controlled and unhurried. As the sunlight faded to a distant glow high above, Njord summoned a soft light of his own. The conch shell in his hands gleamed softly, its spiral patterns seeming to absorb and reflect this gentle radiance. He continued downward, following ancient pathways known to few outside Aegir's court, his movements as fluid as the currents that occasionally tugged at his robes and hair. The seafloor, when it finally came into view, was unlike the sandy beaches of his own domain. Here, vast plains of silt stretched in all directions, punctuated by strange formations, coral structures that towered like the pillars of a submerged temple, their surfaces glowing with faint bioluminescence. Fish of weird and wonderful shapes drifted between these pillars, their bodies transparent or adorned with lights of their own. Njord oriented himself, drawing on old memories and the subtle pull of divine intuition. Aegir's hall lay to the east, beyond a forest of kelp that marked the boundary between the open sea and the sea god's personal domain. With smooth, measured strokes, Njord propelled himself forward, moving parallel to the seafloor without touching it, mindful not to disturb the delicate silt that could cloud the water if displaced. As he approached the kelp forest, the water around him seemed to thicken, becoming more resistant to his passage. This was the first sign that he had reached the outer boundaries of Aegir's realm proper, where the natural laws of the ocean began to blend with divine will and intention. Njord paused, floating silently before the undulating green barrier. "I seek passage to Aegir's hall," Njord announced formally, his voice carrying through the water with unusual clarity. "I am Njord of the Vanir, Lord of winds and shores, and I come bearing a gift in friendship." For a long moment there was no response save the continued rhythmic movement of the kelp. Then, gradually, the density of the fronds began to shift, creating a pathway just wide enough for a single traveler. Njord inclined his head in acknowledgement of this permission and entered the forest, the conch shell held carefully before him like a lantern. Inside the kelp forest, sound behaved differently. The constant background murmur of the ocean, the whisper of currents, the distant calls of great sea beasts, the clicking and humming of smaller creatures, all faded to a profound, waiting silence. Each movement of Njord's body through the water seemed amplified, the gentle swish of his robes abnormally distinct against this hushed backdrop. The kelp fronds reached toward him as he passed, not threateningly, but with apparent curiosity, brushing against his arms and face with the lightness of a question. Njord allowed this contact, recognizing it as both test and recognition. These were not ordinary plants, but extensions of Aegir's awareness, sentinels that reported back to their master about those who sought entrance to his domain. As he progressed deeper into the forest, Njord became aware of eyes watching him, some visible as glimmers among the kelp, others felt rather than seen. The denizens of this border realm were assessing him, measuring his intent. His grip on the conch tightened slightly, not from fear, but from awareness that its magic was responding to this scrutiny, the shell warming against his palms. The kelp forest opened suddenly into a clearing of sorts, a perfect circle where no plants grew from the seafloor. At the center of this circle stood a figure who was definitely not Aegir, slender and fluid in form, with skin that shimmered between blue and green and hair that floated around her head like a living crown of silver seaweed. She was unmistakably one of Rand's daughters. one of the 9 wave maidens born to Aegir's wife. Njord of the Vanir, she greeted him, her voice like water flowing over smooth stones. I am Beolja, 3rd daughter of Ran. My father sensed your approach. Her eyes, the color of deep ocean trenches, regarded him with ancient intelligence. It has been many cycles of the moon since you last ventured so deep. Greetings, Bicycle. Njord replied with a respectful inclination of his head. Your father's awareness does him credit. I come bearing a gift for tomorrow's feast. He held the conch shell forward slightly, allowing her to see but not touch it. Beolja circled him with fluid grace, her movement creating barely a current in the water. A shell from the western shores, she observed, but not merely a shell, I think. Her gaze was evaluative but not hostile. My father expected something grander from the Vanir, perhaps a chest of enchanted amber or a net woven from moonbeams. Njord smiled, unperturbed by what might have been intended as a slight. Those who understand true value look beyond mere appearance, he replied, but I would not presume to explain my gift to any save Aegir himself. A flicker of amusement passed across Beolja's features. Well answered, Shorelord, yet the way to my father's hall is not direct, especially for those who visit so rarely. The paths of the deep shift and change with the tides and my father's moods. She gestured to the kelp forests surrounding them, which seemed to rustle despite the absence of current. Each of my sisters guards a section of the way. I am merely the first you must satisfy. And how might I satisfy your guardianship, daughter of Ran? Njord asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. A truth, Beolja replied, confirming his suspicion. The deep places value honesty above all pleasantries. Tell me a truth about yourself that the surface world does not know, and I will guide you to the next segment of your journey. Njord considered this request carefully. The 9 daughters of Ran and Aegir were known for their capricious nature, much like the waves they embodied. A truth given to one might be used by another in unexpected ways, yet refusing the challenge would be seen as disrespectful. Very well, he agreed after a moment. Though I am known as Lord of favorable winds and calm shores, there are days when I envy the storm's freedom, when I wish to unleash gales that would drive ships to shelter and send waves crashing beyond their boundaries. The responsibility of safety sometimes weighs heavily against the desire for wild expression. Beolja's eyes widened slightly, suggesting his confession had genuinely surprised her. Interesting, she murmured, the calm harborer of secret tempests. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded. Your truth is accepted, Njord of the Vanir. Follow me, and I will lead you to the next guardian. She turned and swam toward the opposite side of the clearing, her form slipping easily between kelp fronds that parted at her approach. Njord followed, noting how the pattern of the forest seemed to change around them as they progressed. The kelp growing taller and more densely packed, its color deepening from vibrant green to an almost black-blue hue. The depths change those who dwell in them, Beolja commented as they swam. Even gods are not immune to transformation when they venture far from their natural domains. Remember this, Shorelord. The kelp forest opened into another clearing, this one larger than the first and dominated by a series of stone arches rising from the seafloor. The arches were covered in luminous coral that pulsed with soft light in patterns too regular to be natural. Messages or warnings, in a script Njord did not recognize. Floating beneath the central arch was another of Ran's daughters, immediately distinguishable from Beolja despite their sisterly resemblance. Where Beolja had been all fluid grace, this wave maiden held herself with rigid posture, her hair bound in complicated knots that suggested the dangerous complexity of tidal whirlpools. "Blodugada greets the shore-bound visitor," she announced, using the formal third-person address that had fallen out of favor in Asgard centuries ago. Her voice carried the hint of breaking waves. "Bulgiad has found you worthy to proceed, but my test differs from my sister's. I am honored to meet you, Blodugada," Njord replied, matching her formality. "I come in peace and friendship." "Peace and friendship are surface concepts that shift like sand," Blodugada responded, swimming a tight circle around him that created a subtle current, tugging at his robes and hair. "The deep knows only endurance and change. To pass my guardianship, you must demonstrate understanding of both." She gestured to the stone arches surrounding them. "Choose a path forward, Shore Lord. One arch leads toward my father's hall. The others lead to less hospitable regions of the deep." Her smile revealed teeth that seemed too sharp for her otherwise beautiful face. "Choose wrongly, and you may still arrive at your destination, eventually, but perhaps not as whole as you began." Njord surveyed the arches, counting 7 in total, each seemingly identical in construction, though the patterns of light playing across their coral coverings differed subtly. This was clearly a test designed to challenge his perception, and perhaps his courage as well. He closed his eyes, extending his awareness beyond physical sight. Though the deep ocean was not his domain, Njord still possessed the innate sensitivity to water that defined his divine nature. He allowed himself to feel the currents flowing through each arch, tasting their direction and intent with senses beyond the ordinary. 6 of the arches emitted currents that felt wrong to his perception, some too warm, others too cold, one vibrating with an energy that spoke of crushing pressure, another carrying the unmistakable scent of predatory. But the third arch from the left generated a current that resonated with something in the conch shell he carried, a harmonious note that suggested rightness. Without opening his eyes, Njord swam toward this arch, stopping just before it. "I choose this path," he stated, finally looking at Blodugada. The Wave Maiden's expression remained impassive for a long moment, then cracked into a smile of genuine approval. "The Shore Lord has better instincts for the deep than expected," she acknowledged. "Your choice is correct. This arch will carry you to my sister Heminglaeva's domain, where she awaits with her own challenge." She swam to hover beside the arch she had selected. "Enter when ready, but know this. Beyond this point, the waters grow stranger still. The laws of surface and shore hold less sway with each league you travel toward my father's hall." Njord inclined his head in acknowledgement of both the warning and the implicit compliment in her surprised approval. "Thank you, Blodugada. May the tides flow ever in your favor." With that traditional blessing of her domain, he swam forward and through the chosen arch. The transition was instant and disorientating. Where before there had been the relatively open space of the kelp forest clearing, now Njord found himself in what appeared to be an underwater canyon of immense proportions. Walls of black stone rose on either side, so tall that their upper reaches disappeared into the murky distance above. Ahead, the canyon stretched into darkness, its path winding like a great serpent between the towering walls. Njord began to swim forward, staying well above the treacherous seafloor with its unpredictable vents and fissures. As he progressed, he became aware of movement in the shadows along the canyon walls. Large forms that kept pace with him just at the edge of visibility, never revealing themselves fully. "Visitors to the deep must be observed," came a voice from everywhere and nowhere. its tone reminiscent of glacial ice breaking in spring thaws, especially those who normally dwell in the shallows. Njord halted his forward progress, remaining perfectly still in the water as he tried to locate the source of the voice. "I am observed and judged at every turn, it seems," he responded evenly. "Are you Himinglaver, third guardian of the path?" A soft laugh echoed through the canyon, causing small swirls in the water around him. Third guardian by some reckonings, fifth by others. Time and sequence flow differently in the deep places. A figure gradually coalesced from the shadows ahead, assembling itself from what seemed to be the darkness itself until it took on feminine form. Himinglaver appeared older than her sisters, with an ageless quality to her features that suggested wisdom earned through millennia of observation. Her hair floated around her in complicated patterns that seemed to form and reform images from ancient myths. Her eyes, when they finally focused on Njord, held the cold light of the deepest ocean trenches. "You bring a gift to my father," she stated, her gaze dropping to the conch shell in his hands. A curious choice, a vessel of emptiness and silence to one whose domain is full of sound and fury. "Not emptiness," Njord corrected gently, "potentiality. And not silence, but clarity. The moment between breaths, the pause between heartbeats, where true understanding becomes possible." Himinglaver tilted her head, studying him with renewed interest. "Poetically spoken, Shorelord. Perhaps there is depth to you beyond what my sisters expected." She gestured to the conch. "May I examine it more closely?" "You may look, but not touch," he offered as compromise, holding the shell forward where the light emanating from his body illuminated it more clearly. Himinglaver drifted closer, her eyes narrowing as she inspected the conch without attempting to take it. After a long moment, she nodded and withdrew slightly. "Interesting. It contains more than I first perceived. My challenge to you is simple compared to my sisters. Answer a riddle, and I will show you the way forward." Njord nodded his acceptance. Riddles were common currency among the gods, tests of wisdom rather than strength or magic. Himinglaver's voice took on a rhythmic quality as she posed her question. "I am born in silence, grow in darkness, die in light. I can fill a room yet take no space. The wise seek me, fools flee me. What am I?" Njord considered the riddle carefully. It was cleverly constructed, with multiple possible answers depending on one's perspective. Then, as he floated in the strange darkness of the underwater canyon, the answer came to him with sudden clarity. "You are contemplation," he replied, "born in silence when the mind stills itself, growing in the darkness of focused thought, dying when exposed too quickly to the light of action or distraction. Contemplation fills a mind as thoroughly as it might fill a room, yet occupies no physical space. The wise indeed seek such moments of deep thought, while fools avoid them, preferring the comforts of constant noise and activity." Himinglaver's expression remained impassive for several heartbeats, then softened into something approaching approval. "Well answered, Njord of the Vanir. Few who visit the deep places understand the value of contemplation. They are too eager to complete their business and return to the familiar comforts of the surface." She gestured toward a previously unnoticed opening in the canyon wall behind her. "Continue your journey through there. My sister Dufar awaits you in the cavern of memories." With a movement like a wave receding from shore, Himinglaver backed away into the shadows until she was indistinguishable from the darkness itself. Her voice lingered after her form had disappeared. "Remember, Shorelord, in the deep, contemplation becomes more than mental exercise. It becomes transformation." Njord swam toward the opening she had indicated, discovering that what had appeared to be a simple fissure in the rock wall was actually the entrance to a tunnel lined with glowing, animated etchings. The illumination revealed intricate patterns etched into the rock, stylized waves and spirals that seemed to ripple with movement despite being fixed in stone. The tunnel widened dramatically into a vast, domed cavern. The space was enormous, larger than Odin's great hall Valhalla, and every surface was covered in the same glowing, animated etchings that had adorned the tunnel. But here, the images were not confined to the walls. They floated freely through the water as three-dimensional projections of light and shadow, moving around Njord like schools of illuminated fish, each containing a fragment of memory or knowledge preserved from the ocean's long existence. At the center of this spectacle floated a figure that could only be Dufa, the fourth daughter of Ran. Unlike her sisters, who had each displayed some aspect of the ocean's more dramatic nature, Dufa embodied serenity. Her form was less sharply defined, her edges blending softly with the surrounding water, as if she were partially composed of it. Her hair did not float wildly, but lay in gentle waves against her shoulders and back. "Welcome to the Cavern of Memories, Njord of the Shores," she greeted him, her voice like the softest lapping of waves against sand. Few visitors appreciate the historical tableau in the approach tunnel as thoroughly as you did. "The records are fascinating," Njord replied honestly. "Many show events unknown in Asgard's chronicles or even Vanaheim's oldest songs." Dufa smiled, a gentle expression that nonetheless conveyed ancient wisdom. "The sea remembers what land dwellers forget. Even gods are subject to the erosion of memory over sufficient time." She gestured to the floating images surrounding them. "Here, nothing is ever truly lost. Every drop of the ocean contains the memory of all it has been part of, from the first rains that fell upon newly formed earth to the tears of gods and giants shed into its vastness." "It's beautiful," he said simply, watching as an image of ancient sea dragons in courtship dance drifted past. "Beauty and meaning intertwined," Dufa agreed, "which brings me to my challenge for you, Shore Lord. Unlike my sisters who tested your wisdom or perception, I would know your purpose. Why do you bring this particular gift to my father? Not the surface answer, the true one that resonates in the depths of your intent." Njord looked down at the conch shell in his hands, considering its nature and his reasons for choosing it. The gods gather frequently in celebration, bringing gifts meant to impress or outshine others. I have participated in this tradition for eons, watching as each feast becomes a subtle battlefield of pride and positioning. He ran a finger along the spiral of the conch. "But lately I have found myself yearning for something different, moments of true communion rather than competition." The floating memories around them seemed to slow in their movements, as if the cavern itself were listening to his words. "This shell," Njord continued, "contains the sound of perfect dawn stillness. That moment when night has ended but day has not yet asserted itself, when the tide hangs balanced between ebb and flow. It is a reminder of what exists between actions and words, the space where meaning truly resides." He looked up, meeting Dufa's gaze directly. "I bring it to your father not to impress, but to share a perspective rarely considered at our gatherings, that power can be found in stillness as surely as in storm." For a long moment, Dufa was silent, her form seeming to become even less distinct at its edges as she absorbed his explanation. When she finally responded, her voice carried a note of genuine respect. "Truth from the depths indeed, Shore Lord. Few who visit these halls speak with such honesty about their own kind or their own hearts. She moved in a slow circle around him, trailing fingers through the water that left ripples of phosphorescent light. You have satisfied my challenge more thoroughly than expected. She gestured toward a particular section of the cavern wall where the glowing etchings formed a distinct archway shape. The path to my sister Hefring awaits you there. Before you continue, though, I offer a gift in return for your honesty. Dufar extended her hand, palm upward. Floating above it was a tiny pearl unlike any Njord had seen before. Its surface not the usual white or cream, but a shifting opalescence that reminded him of the dawn sky his conch shell had captured in sand. A memory pearl, she explained. Touch it to your conch before presenting it to my father, and it will enhance the experience for all who hear its music, allowing them not just to hear the dawn stillness, but to feel it as you do when you stand upon your shores at the day's first light. Njord accepted the pearl with appropriate reverence, carefully nestling it alongside the conch shell. Your generosity honors me, Dufar of the gentle waves. I will use your gift as intended. Njord swam through the archway Dufar had indicated, finding himself in a vast, open space unlike anything he had encountered thus far. It appeared to be the interior of an enormous air bubble trapped beneath the ocean floor. A perfect sphere with a solid stone bottom and a curved ceiling of water held in place by some force that defied normal physical laws. The air within this bubble was not truly air at all, but a different type of liquid medium, thinner than water and slightly luminous, through which Njord found he could move even more easily. Floating at the exact center of this sphere was Hefring, fifth daughter of Ran. Her appearance was startling after the relatively humanoid forms of her sisters. Hefring seemed composed primarily of foam and spray, her body constantly forming and reforming from countless tiny bubbles that merged and separated in endless cycles. Only her eyes remained consistent, deep blue orbs that tracked Njord's entrance with predatory intent. The shore dweller ventures far beyond his comfort, she observed, her voice sounding like waves breaking on a rocky coastline. 5 challenges overcome, 4 yet remain before you stand before my father. She circled him rapidly, moving with a speed that left a spiraling trail of bubbles in her wake. Are you certain your gift warrants such effort, Njord of the Vanir? Many turn back at this point, sending their offerings with servants, rather than persisting personally. I am certain, Njord replied calmly, though he found Hefring's rapid movements somewhat disorienting. What challenge would you set before me? Hefring came to an abrupt halt directly before him, her foam form stabilizing momentarily into a more defined shape. My challenge is one of endurance, she declared. In this sphere of suspension, you will experience pressure from all directions simultaneously, not just physical force, but pressure against your very essence, testing the boundaries of your divine nature. Her bubble lips curved into what might have been a smile. How long before you admit the deep is not for surface gods? How long before you surrender your gift and your purpose? Before Njord could respond, Hefring dissolved completely into the surrounding medium. The sphere began to contract around him, the strange, luminous liquid growing denser, heavier, pressing against him from all sides. It was not merely physical pressure, though that was considerable, but a more fundamental compression that seemed to target his divine essence itself, squeezing against the very energy that defined him as Njord. For a moment, pain flared along every boundary of his being, sharp enough to draw an involuntary sound from his lips. The conch shell in his hands grew hot, reacting to his distress. Instinctively, he began to resist, pushing back against the compression with his own divine power, but this only intensified the pressure, as if the sphere were designed to respond proportionally to resistance. Understanding came quickly. This was not a test he could overcome through strength or clever solutions. Heffring had named it accurately, a challenge of endurance, but perhaps not in the way she had implied. The key was not to endure by fighting back, but to endure by accepting. Njord closed his eyes and deliberately relaxed every aspect of his being, physically and spiritually. Instead of resisting the pressure, he allowed it to settle against him, around him, through him. He did not fight to maintain rigid boundaries, but permitted a certain flexing of his essence, bending without breaking, adapting without surrendering. The pressure continued unabated for what might have been moments or hours. Time seemed strangely irrelevant within the sphere. Njord maintained his state of accepting endurance, focusing on the conch shell in his hands and the purpose that had brought him this far. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the liquid medium around him began to thin, the pressure easing by increments, until it returned to its original state. Heffring reappeared, her bubble form coalescing more slowly this time, her expression thoughtful rather than challenging. "Interesting," she commented. "Most visitors attempt to overpower the sphere or bargain for release. Few understand that acceptance can be stronger than resistance." Njord opened his eyes, finding that his divine form had indeed changed subtly. Not diminished, but somehow more fluid at its edges, better adapted to the deep environment. The transformation Himinglaev had hinted at, perhaps. "Water teaches that lesson to any who truly listen," he replied. "The reed survives the flood that uproots the oak. Wisdom from a god of shores," Heffring acknowledged with what seemed like genuine respect. "You may proceed to my sister Un's domain." She gestured toward a portion of the sphere's wall that began to thin, creating an opening. "The way grows shorter now, though not necessarily easier." As Njord swam toward the exit, Heffring called after him. "Take care with your gift, Shore Lord. Its nature has been altered by your experience here. Whether for better or worse remains to be seen." Njord glanced down at the conch shell and saw that Heffring spoke truth. The shell's iridescence had intensified, and faint patterns now swirled across its surface. Patterns that matched the compression forces he had experienced in the sphere. The memory pearl Dufa had given him had partially merged with the shell's surface, creating a new wall in its spiral structure. The passage beyond Heffring's sphere led him to a natural cavern of enormous proportions. Unlike the cavern of memories, this space was dominated by physical structures, towering columns of coral and crystal that rose from floor to ceiling like the pillars of a submerged cathedral. Between these pillars swam countless sea creatures of all sizes and descriptions, from tiny phosphorescent fish to entities so large their full forms disappeared into the shadowy distance. Sitting, not floating, but actually seated, upon a throne-like formation at the cavern's center was Un, sixth daughter of Ran. Her appearance was the most human-like of all her sisters thus far, save for the gills visible along her neck and the webbing between her fingers. Her throne was a giant oyster shell lined with mother of pearl, and arrayed around it were what appeared to be supplicants or courtiers, lesser ocean spirits and possibly minor sea gods from pantheons Njord did not recognize. "Approach, Lord of Shores," Un called, her voice carrying the melodic quality of whale song beneath its human tones. "Your persistence impresses even the deep places." She gestured, dismissing her attendants, who swam away with varying degrees of grace and speed. 6 challenges overcome. 3 remaining before you stand in my father's presence. Njord swam forward and offered a formal bow appropriate to her apparent status. "I am honored to enter your domain, Lady Un. Your hall is impressive in its grandeur." A smile touched Un's lips. The deep appreciates courtly manners, though we practice them differently than the surface realms. She rose from her throne in a single fluid movement that suggested power held in perfect control. My challenge differs from those of my sisters. I do not require riddles answered, or truths shared, or pressures endured. She circled her throne once, trailing fingers across its pearlescent surface. I require a gift. A gift, Njord repeated, momentarily confused. But I bring a gift already, intended for your father, and it shall reach him if you satisfy all challenges. Un agreed. But to pass through my domain requires tribute specific to me. All who enter must provide something of value. Value measured by what it costs the giver, not merely by what it might be worth to others. Her gaze fell pointedly on the conch shell in his hands. Not that, however. Something personal. Something of yourself. Njord considered Un's request carefully. Gifts that truly cost the giver were rare among the gods, who generally had power enough to create or obtain whatever they desired. What did he possess that represented genuine sacrifice? After a moment's reflection, Njord reached into his robe and withdrew a small object that hung on a cord around his neck, a piece of amber within which was suspended a single drop of water. "This I offer," he said, removing the cord. "It contains the first teardrop I ever shed, preserved in amber from Vanaheim's oldest tree. I wept it upon witnessing the sea meeting the shore for the first time when I first understood my purpose." He held it out toward Un. "It represents the moment of my becoming, not merely a god, but specifically the god I am. There exists nothing else like it in all the 9 realms." Un's expression registered genuine surprise as she accepted the offering. She held it up, studying the preserved teardrop with an intensity that suggested she could see more within it than was visible to ordinary perception. "This is more than I expected," she admitted finally, closing her fingers gently around the amber. "Most visitors offer power or knowledge or magical trinkets easily replaced. You give a moment of your own becoming that can never be duplicated." She returned to her throne, placing the amber carefully upon a small shelf beside it. "Your gift is accepted, Njord of the Vanir. You may proceed to my sister Droft's territory with my blessing." The passage beyond Un's throne room narrowed quickly, forcing Njord to adjust his swimming position to a more horizontal orientation. Unlike the previous tunnels, this one was not straight, but wound in tight spiral patterns, descending ever deeper while simultaneously curving in what felt like a gradual approach towards some central point. The walls here were not stone, but living coral, which seemed to pulse with slow, deliberate movement as he passed. After completing several full rotations of this spiral descent, the tunnel widened suddenly into a roughly spherical chamber with dozens of identical exits arranged around its circumference. In the center of this chamber hovered Drafna, 7th daughter of Ran, her form constantly shifting between 3 distinct appearances. At one moment, a beautiful maiden with skin like polished abalone, the next a creature half woman and half octopus, and the third a swirling vortex of water that merely suggested feminine form. Confused shorelord, her voice asked from everywhere and nowhere as she continued to shift between forms. "Good. Confusion is the beginning of understanding in the deep places." Her laughter echoed strangely in the spherical chamber. 7 challenges overcome, 2 remaining, but first, you must find your way through my labyrinth. She gestured to the identical tunnels surrounding them. "One path leads to my sister Kolga, the others lead elsewhere. Choose incorrectly, and you may wander for days before finding your way back to this chamber to try again." Her form settled momentarily into the beautiful maiden aspect. I offer no riddle, no test of endurance, simply choice and consequence, as all life presents, does it not? Njord studied the identical openings, seeing nothing that distinguished one from another. Is there a clue to guide my choice? He asked, suspecting he already knew the answer. Drofnir laughed again, shifting to her vortex form. The wise question is not which path to choose, but whether choosing is necessary at all. With that cryptic statement, she began to spin more rapidly, creating a current that tugged at Njord and his precious conch shell. He considered her words carefully, looking again at the circular arrangement of identical tunnels, then at the constantly shifting form of Ran's daughter. Understanding dawned gradually. The visual symmetry of the chamber, the three-formed nature of his host, her words about choice itself. The paths are illusion, he stated with quiet confidence. Or rather, they are all the same path, connected through some property of the deep I do not fully comprehend. It matters not which I choose, because all lead to the same destination, merely through different experiences of the journey. Drofnir's spinning slowed, and she settled into her half-octopus form, tentacles waving slowly around her humanoid torso. Perceptive, she acknowledged, but knowing does not eliminate the necessity of choice. Select your path, Shore Lord, with the understanding that while all roads lead eventually to the same destination, the journey shapes the traveler and perhaps the gift he carries. Njord nodded, accepting the wisdom in her words. After a moment's contemplation, he swam deliberately toward the tunnel directly opposite the one through which he had entered the chamber. I choose balance, he explained. Equal distance from entry to exit, neither turning aside nor repeating my path. A shore dweller's logic? Drofnir observed, though without mockery. Go then, with my acknowledgement, if not quite my blessing. Kolga awaits, and after her, hymning Leava once more. The passage twisted through impossible angles, sometimes appearing to loop back upon itself without actually returning to previous sections. Light and shadow played strangely along the walls, creating illusions of depth where none existed and flatness where sharp corners turned. Throughout this disorienting journey, Njord kept his focus on the conch shell in his hands, using it as both physical and spiritual anchor against the tunnel's attempts to confuse his senses. Just when the distortions threatened to become truly nauseating, the tunnel straightened suddenly and opened into a vast dark space that initially appeared to be open ocean rather than any enclosed chamber. Only after his eyes adjusted did Njord realize he had entered an immense cavern, whose walls were so distant they remained invisible in the gloom. The water here was colder than any he had passed through previously, with a stillness that suggested great depth and isolation from surface currents. Floating in this darkness was a single point of blue-white light, pulsing with slow regularity like a heartbeat. Njord swam toward it, drawn by its solitary presence in the otherwise perfect blackness. As he approached, the light resolved into the figure of Kolga, eighth and penultimate daughter of Ran. Unlike her sisters, who had all displayed some aspect of the ocean's vitality and movement, Kolga embodied its deepest stillness. Her form was translucent as the clearest ice, her movements minimal and precisely controlled. The blue-white light emanated from within her, suggesting the bioluminescence of creatures adapted to the ocean's greatest depths. You have come far, Njord of the shores, she greeted him, her voice barely above a whisper yet carrying perfectly through the still water. 8 challenges overcome, 1 remaining. My sisters have tested your wisdom, your honesty, your perception, your endurance, your generosity, and your understanding of illusion. I test something simpler, your ability to listen. She extended one crystalline hand, palm upward. Place your gift upon my palm. I would hear what it contains before you present it to my father. Njord hesitated. The conch was meant for Aegir specifically, its magic attuned to the Sea King's nature. Yet Kolka's request was framed not as claiming the gift for herself, but merely experiencing it first. A reasonable request from the final guardian before Aegir's direct presence. With careful movements, he placed the spiral shell upon her outstretched palm. It contains the sound of perfect dawn stillness, he explained, enhanced now by your sister Dufa's memory pearl, and my experiences through the deep passages. Kolga nodded slowly, curling her fingers around the conch without quite touching it, creating a cradle of ice-like flesh in which it floated. She raised it to her ear with ceremonial deliberation, her eyes closing as she listened to whatever sounds emerged from its spiral depths. For what seemed like an eternity, she remained motionless, listening. Njord waited patiently, knowing that rushing Kolga would be both futile and disrespectful. Finally, her eyes opened, revealing irises like twin abysses that reflected no light from her bioluminescent form. Listen, she commanded softly, extending the conch back toward him. Truly listen, with more than ears alone. Puzzled but obedient, Njord accepted the shell and raised it to his own ear. What he heard shocked him into perfect stillness of his own. The sound was indeed the dawn stillness he had captured, but transformed, deepened and expanded by his journey through Aegir's realm. The silence between heartbeats had become a living thing, resonant with possibilities and wisdom gathered from the deep places. Dufa's memory pearl had added texture to the emptiness, creating layers of meaningful absence where before there had been merely peaceful quiet. He could hear not just the pause between tides, but the consciousness behind that pause. The ocean thinking, the deep reflecting upon itself. Most surprisingly, Njord heard aspects of himself within the conch, echoes of his responses to each challenge, fragments of truth offered to Bulja, contemplation shared with Himingleva, acceptance demonstrated to Hefring, sacrifice given to Uning, understanding shown to Droth. The gift had indeed been transformed by his journey, becoming more personal and more universal simultaneously. When he finally lowered the conch from his ear, Njord found Kolga watching him with an expression that might have been approval. You truly heard, she observed. Many listen only to what they expect or wish to hear, missing the deeper harmonies. The conch has changed, Njord acknowledged, as have I suspect. All who journey through the deep are transformed by it, Kolga agreed. Your gift is worthy of my father's hall, Shore Lord. It carries not just what you initially intended, but what you have become during your passage. She gestured to a point in the darkness that suddenly illuminated, revealing a simple archway formed of intertwined strands of luminescent seaweed. Himingleva awaits you there, for the final challenge before my father's presence. Go with the deep's acknowledgement. With each guardian overcome, both Njord and his gift changed subtly, adapting to the deep places and their wisdom. Finally, he arrived at the outer boundary of Aegir's hall proper, a structure unlike any in the surface realms. It appeared to be an enormous spiral shell, similar to his gift, but scaled to titanic proportions, large enough to house hundreds of gods and spirits comfortably. Its outer surface gleamed with mother-of-pearl iridescence that shifted colors with each subtle current in the surrounding water. Himingleva awaited him there once more as both first and final guardian. 9 challenges overcome, she stated as he approached. You stand now at the threshold of my father's hall, bearing a gift transformed by your journey. My final challenge is also the simplest. Explain what you have learned during your passage through the deep places. Njord considered the request thoughtfully, looking down at the conch in his hands, then at his own subtly altered form, before meeting Himinglaver's ancient eyes again. I have learned that boundaries I thought fixed are actually permeable, he began. The distinction between shore and deep, between self and surroundings, between gift and giver, all more fluid than I had understood before this journey. He gestured to the magnificent shell place before them. I came bearing what I thought was wisdom about stillness and contemplation, only to discover that the deep already holds these truths in forms more profound than I had imagined. My gift is not teaching but learning, offering not what the surface knows about silence, but returning to Aegir what the depths have always known, filtered through a perspective shaped by both worlds. Himinglaver's expression softened into genuine warmth, the first such emotion any of Rand's daughters had displayed so openly. Well answered, Shorelord. Few visitors to the deep places understand that their greatest gift is not what they bring, but what they become. She moved aside from the entrance with formal grace. My father awaits within. Enter freely, and with the blessing of the 9 daughters of Rand. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior had suggested. The spiral structure created a series of connected chambers that wound inward, each decorated in a style that captured some aspect of the ocean's many moods and environments. Throughout these spaces, preparations for the upcoming feast were evident. Long tables formed from polished stone and coral, decorated with treasures from shipwrecks and natural ocean bounty. At the very center of this spiral lay Aegir's throne room, a perfectly circular chamber whose domed ceiling was adorned with what appeared to be stars, though Njord realized after a moment that they were actually rare deep-sea creatures capable of producing their own light, arranged in patterns that mimicked the night sky visible from the ocean's surface. Seated upon a throne formed from a single massive blue pearl was Aegir himself, sea king and brewer to the gods. His appearance combined aspects of humanity, divinity, and the ocean's primordial power. Skin that shifted between normal flesh tones and the blue-green of deep water, hair and beard that moved like anemone tendrils despite the chamber's stillness. Beside him stood his wife Rand, netted and far more predatory in aspect than her husband. As Njord approached, Aegir rose from his throne, arms extended in welcome. Njord of the Vanir, you honor us by delivering your gift personally rather than sending it with messengers. His gaze fell upon the altered conch shell with evident interest. My daughters tell me you have passed all 9 challenges with wisdom and grace, unusual for a shore-dwelling deity. Njord bowed deeply, then straightened to look Aegir in the eyes, a gesture of respect between equals rather than supplication. Great Aegir, Lord of the deep places, I bring this gift not merely as offering, but as bridge between our domains. He held forth the conch shell with both hands. It contains the sound of perfect dawn stillness, the moment between breaths, the pause between heartbeats, enhanced now by my journey through your realm and the generosity of your daughter Dufa. Aegir accepted the shell with appropriate ceremony, examining its transformed appearance with obvious appreciation. A thoughtful gift, he acknowledged, and one made more meaningful by the journey of its bearer. He raised the conch to his ear, listening for a long moment, with closed eyes. When he lowered it again, his expression had softened noticeably. You bring stillness to one whose nature is constant movement, silence to halls that will soon echo with feasting and celebration, a counterpoint that creates harmony rather than discord. He inclined his head in gratitude. It shall have place of honor at tomorrow's gathering. Ran moved forward then, her predatory aspect somehow enhanced by the gentle smile she offered. "You have changed during your passage through our realm, Shore Lord," she observed, gesturing to his subtly altered appearance. "The deep has marked you as one who understands its nature beyond the superficial knowledge most surface dwellers possess." After exchanging formal farewells with both sea deities and promising to return the following evening for the feast, Njord followed a guide, thread provided by Ran, that led him along the swiftest currents back to his own domain. As he rose through the ocean's layers, the pressure decreased, the water warmed, and gradually light from the surface world began to filter down in wavering beams. Finally, the familiar sandy slope that led to his own shores came into view. With smooth, powerful strokes, he propelled himself the remaining distance, breaking the surface just as the afternoon sun touched the western horizon with early golden light. Freya waited where he had left her, seated upon a driftwood log smoothed by years of tidal action. She rose immediately as he emerged from the waves, his form solidifying from its water-adapted state back to his more familiar appearance, though certain subtle changes remained, particularly in his eyes, which now carried hints of the deep ocean's ancient wisdom. "You return changed, father," she observed as he approached, water streaming from his robes and beard. "Your journey was successful?" Norin smiled, feeling the weight of the surface world settle back upon him, not unpleasantly, but noticeably after his time in the buoyant deep. "More than successful," he replied. "Educational, transformative." He looked out over the sea, which seemed somehow more familiar and more mysterious simultaneously after his experiences below. "Aegir's feast tomorrow will be worth attending, I think. Different, perhaps, from previous gathering." Freya studied him with the perceptiveness that made her formidable among the Vanir. "You found something in the depths beyond mere passage and gift-giving," she stated, rather than asked. "Perhaps the gift was more for me than for Aegir," Njord acknowledged, beginning to walk along his shoreline with his daughter at his side. "The conch shell contained silence and stillness, qualities I sought to share with realms often dominated by noise and activity. But the deep places already knew these truths, in forms more profound than I had imagined." He stopped to pick up a small, perfect shell that had washed ashore, examining its spiral pattern with newfound appreciation. "In seeking to give wisdom, I received it instead." Freya smiled, linking her arm through his as they continued their walk along the shore where sea met land, the boundary between realms that was Njord's special domain, now understood not as division, but as connection. "The best gifts often work that way," she observed, "given and received simultaneously, changing both giver and recipient." As father and daughter walked along the shoreline in the fading afternoon light, the tide began its gentle retreat, not truly leaving but merely breathing out, creating space and silence before its inevitable return. Tomorrow would bring Aegir's feast with its gathering of gods and spirits, but tonight, in the calm before that celebration, Njord would sit upon his shores and listen to the silence between waves. A silence that now echoed with depths of meaning he had glimpsed during his journey through Aegir's realm. For gods, like oceans, contained multitudes, surface and depth, movement and stillness, sound and silence, all part of the same essential nature, all worthy of exploration and understanding. This was the true gift Njord had discovered, carried now within himself like a pearl of wisdom formed around the grain of his original intent, transformed by his journey through the deep places of both ocean and self. Thank you for joining us for the calm before Aegir's feast, where we journeyed with Njord through the tranquil depths of the ocean realm. We hope you enjoyed this peaceful exploration of Norse mythology's underwater domain. In our next story, we'll shift from the serene depths of the sea to the dramatic clash of elemental forces on Midgard's surface. Join us as Thor confronts a rogue fire giant from Muspelheim who has created a colossal fiery golem to wreak havoc on Midgard's farmlands. Experience the god of thunder's fierce determination to protect innocent villagers as he engages in an epic battle of lightning versus flame. Where the calm before Aegir's feast invited you to float through underwater stillness, the feud of fire and thunder will sweep you into the heroic rescue of mortal lands from destructive elemental forces. We invite you to return for this thrilling tale of Thor's courage and protective might, where the clash of thunder and fire culminates in a spectacular confrontation and the salvation of Midgard's peaceful countryside. The edge of Midgard is not a place most mortals dare to tread. Where the known world gives way to the vast temperamental sea, there exists a boundary between realms. Not quite Asgard, certainly not Jotunheim, but somewhere the gods and spirits pass through like whispers on the wind. It is here, upon the northernmost peninsula of Lindisfjord, that the ancient lighthouse stands sentinel against the gathering darkness, its weathered stone walls defying centuries of relentless gales and salt-laden air. The structure rises from the jagged cliff face like a lone finger pointing accusingly at the sky, its circular form tapering gracefully toward the glass-enclosed chamber at its summit. There, a flame burns with unnatural steadiness, a fire that neither flickers nor dims, regardless of how violently the wind howls around it. The locals in the distant fishing village speak of it in hushed, reverent tones. The everlasting flame, a gift from Njord himself, god of the sea and winds, bestowed in an age when gods still walked freely among mortals. Leif Njordsen tends this flame as his father did before him, and his grandmother before that, a line of keepers stretching back through time like the wake of a ship across dark waters. His is a life of isolation and purpose, his days measured not by the company of fellow humans but by the rhythmic flash of light against encroaching darkness, by the turning of stars overhead, and by the endless dance of sea and sky that plays out before his watchful eyes. This morning, like countless mornings before, Leif awakens before the sun breaches the horizon. His small chamber within the lighthouse is Spartan but comfortable. A narrow bed with wool blankets, a simple wooden table and chair, shelves lined with worn books and nautical charts, and a small hearth where he prepares his meals. The stone walls around him hold the chill of the night, but Leif has long since grown accustomed to the cold's embrace. He dresses methodically, woolen undergarments worn soft with age, sturdy trousers of boiled leather that repel the sea spray, a thick sweater knitted from the wool of Highland sheep, dyed the deep blue-green of the ocean depths. Around his neck hangs an amulet, a simple disc of polished amber with a strange symmetrical pattern visible within its translucent depths. Some say it resembles Yggdrasil, the world tree. Others claim it is Njord's mark. Leif knows only that it has been passed from keeper to keeper since time immemorial, a symbol of their sacred duty. His morning ritual never varies. First, he climbs the spiral staircase to the top of the lighthouse, his footsteps echoing against stone worn smooth by generations of keepers. The flame chamber awaits him, a circular room enclosed by thick panes of glass, meticulously cleaned each day to ensure maximum brilliance. At the center stands the bronze brazier that houses the everlasting flame, its golden blue light casting long shadows across the chamber. Though the flame never dies, it requires tending. Leif approaches with appropriate reverence, removing a small vial of sacred oil from a pouch at his belt. The oil itself is the color of midnight, so dark it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, harvested from rare deep-sea creatures that surface only during the winter solstice. 3 drops added to the base of the flame cause it to surge momentarily higher, its color shifting through spectrums not normally visible to mortal eyes. For a brief moment, Leif glimpses colors that have no name in any human tongue, hues that exist in the spaces between what the eye can comprehend. Njord's blessing upon the waters, he murmurs, the ritual words as familiar as his own heartbeat. Light to guide the lost, warmth to comfort the weary, beacon to ward the malevolent. As it was, as it is, as it shall be until the coming of Ragnarok. The flame settles, resuming its steady, unearthly brilliance. Leif moves to the glass walls, beginning the daily task of cleaning away salt deposits and gull droppings that accumulate overnight. As he works, he watches the sea. Dark and brooding this morning, its surface rippled with whitecaps that suggest hidden currents beneath. The horizon line blurs where water meets sky, creating the illusion that the lighthouse stands at the very edge of existence, a final outpost before nothingness. There is weather coming, he can feel it in the peculiar ache of his left shoulder, broken decades ago when a sudden squall caught him unaware on the cliff path. The break healed wrong, leaving him with this unwelcome but reliable harbinger of atmospheric change. The clouds gathering to the northwest have an unusual formation, their undersides tinged with a color that reminds him of old bruises, purple-green and vaguely threatening. Leif completes his cleaning without hurry, his movements deliberate and thorough. Time passes differently for lighthouse keepers. Urgency is a concept that belongs to the world of villages and markets, of taverns and meeting halls. Here, on the edge of the world, there is only the rhythm of waves against stone, of light against darkness, of duty fulfilled day after day, without expectation of recognition or reward. With the glass walls gleaming and the flame properly tended, Leif descends to his modest kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast. Fresh bread he baked yesterday, smeared with goat cheese delivered weekly by a village boy too young to fear the witch of the lighthouse, as some call him. Dried fish reconstituted in broth, seasoned with herbs that grow stubbornly in the small sheltered garden he maintains on the lee side of the lighthouse. Strong tea brewed from leaves traded from merchant ships that occasionally shelter in the natural harbor below the cliff. As he eats, a familiar presence announces itself with a sharp tap against the single window of his kitchen. A seabird, unusually large, with feathers the color of steel and eyes that reflect more intelligence than any animal should rightfully possess. Leif has named him Hugin, after one of Odin's ravens, though he knows this creature is not truly the All-Father's messenger. Still, something about the bird suggests a connection to realms beyond mortal understanding. "Good morning, old friend," Leif says, breaking off a portion of bread and placing it on the outer sill. The bird regards him with a tilt of its head before accepting the offering. It has been coming to his window every morning for how long now? 7 years? 8? Time blurs in this place. "Storm coming," Leif continues, as if the bird might understand. "Best find shelter before midday." Hugin makes a sound somewhere between a caw and a chuckle before taking flight, his massive wings creating momentary shadow across the kitchen. Leif watches him go, a speck of darkness against the gradually lightening sky. Sometimes he wonders if the bird is more than it appears, a disguised god, perhaps, or a spirit tasked with observing him. Such thoughts are common when one lives in solitude at the boundary of worlds. After breakfast, Leif attends to his record-keeping, another ritual as old as the lighthouse itself. In a massive leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed with age and sea air, he notes the weather conditions, any ships spotted on the horizon, unusual occurrences in the sea or sky. The previous keeper's entries stretch backward through centuries, some written in languages and scripts Leif can barely decipher, yet he feels a connection to these unknown predecessors each time he adds his own neat runes to the continuing chronicle. Today's entry begins simply. Storm, approaching from the northwest. Unusual cloud formations observed. Sea restless, but navigable. Flame strong and steady after application of 3 drops of winter harvest oil. Hugin appeared at first light. As the morning progresses, the approaching storm reveals more of its character. The clouds continue to mass along the horizon, now taking shapes that stir ancient memories in Leif's mind. Shapes reminiscent of the beasts from old tales his grandmother would tell during the long winter nights of his childhood. There, a formation that resembles Jormungand, the world's serpent, its sinuous body undulating across miles of sky. Beside it, something like the great wolf Fenrir, more open as if to devour the sun itself. And there, could it be the distinctive silhouette of a ship, but not one made by mortal hands? The outline of Naglfar, the vessel made from dead men's nails that would sail at the coming of Ragnarok. Leif shakes his head, dismissing such fancies. Cloud formations often trigger the imagination, especially for one whose mind has been steeped in old legends. Still, he cannot deny that this approaching storm carries an aura of the uncanny. The birds have gone silent, even the ever-present gulls that normally wheel and cry around the lighthouse. The sea itself seems to hold its breath, its surface unnaturally still despite the wind that now begins to tug at Leif's clothing as he stands on the narrow gallery that encircles the flame chamber. Midday brings a brief, uncertain lull, that breathless moment before a storm truly unleashes its fury. Leif uses this time to secure the lighthouse, shuttering the lower windows, checking the stores of food and fresh water, ensuring that additional oil for the everlasting flame is close at hand. Though the flame never falters, tradition demands preparedness. The earliest keepers learned through bitter experience that the boundary between realms can grow thin during great storms, allowing entities from beyond Midgard to test the flame's protective power. As he works, Leif feels a familiar prickling at the base of his skull, the sensation he has come to associate with being observed by eyes not entirely mortal. He turns slowly, scanning the increasingly turbulent waters below the cliff. There, just beyond the line where waves begin to break against submerged rocks, a figure stands upon the water's surface as easily as if it were solid ground. The spectral sailor appears as he always does during the worst storms. A tall, broad-shouldered silhouette with a beard that seems to merge with the sea foam at his feet. He wears the garb of an age long past, a tunic of mail that shifts and flows like liquid silver, a helm adorned with curving horns, a cloak that might be made from the hide of some sea creature unknown to mortal taxonomy. His face remains indistinct, features shifting and reforming like reflections in disturbed water, but his eyes, those remain constant, the pale blue-green of the deepest fjords, filled with ancient wisdom and fathomless sorrow. Leif raises his hand in the traditional salute of respect, right fist placed over his heart, then extended outward, palm upward. "Safe harbors and calm seas await you, wanderer," he calls out, his voice nearly lost in the rising wind. The figure returns the gesture, then points toward the horizon behind him where the storm clouds now mass in earnest. His mouth moves, but the words reach Leif not through his ears but directly in his mind. "The Jotnar ride the storm winds tonight, Keeper. Old grudges seek new battlegrounds." Before Leif can respond, the figure dissolves into sea spray, indistinguishable from the increasingly violent waves. The encounter leaves Leif with the familiar blend of awe and unease that always accompanies the wanderer's appearances. Some keepers believe him to be Njord himself, checking on his gift to mortal kind. Others suggest he might be the ghost of the first keeper, bound to this place by duty that transcends death itself. Leif's grandmother offered a different theory. The spectral sailor is neither god nor ghost, but something in between, a guardian assigned to watch the watchers, to ensure that the sacred trust of the lighthouse passes unbroken from generation to generation. Whatever the truth, his warning cannot be ignored. If Jotnar, frost giants from the realm of Jotunheim, indeed ride the approaching storm, then tonight will test both flame and keeper to their limits. Leif hurries back into the lighthouse, climbing quickly to the flame chamber. The everlasting flame burns as steadily as ever, but now he takes additional precautions. From a small iron chest kept beside the bronze brazier, he removes a handful of rune-carved stones, protection sigils blessed by Seda practitioners from the distant past. These he places in a precise pattern around the base of the flame, murmuring the activation phrases taught to him by his grandmother. Thurisaz, to turn aside malice. Algaiz, to shield and protect. Soilo, to strengthen the light. Dagez, to ensure the coming of dawn. The runes begin to glow with the same unearthly hue as the flame itself, creating a complex geometric pattern of light that extends outward, eventually encompassing the entire flame chamber in a protective mesh, visible only to those with the sight to perceive such things. With these preparations complete, Leif turns his attention to the approaching storm in earnest. He needs to be certain that the warning lanterns along the treacherous coastline are lit, smaller flames that guide ships safely into the natural harbor, steering them away from the submerged rocks that have claimed countless vessels over the centuries. This task would normally wait until dusk, but the unnatural darkness brought by the storm clouds necessitates earlier action. The path down to the coastline is steep and dangerous under the best conditions. With the rising wind and increasingly frequent lashes of rain, it becomes treacherous. Leif navigates it with the sure-footedness born of decades of familiarity, one hand trailing along the guide rope installed by some forgotten predecessor. The air grows thicker as he descends, heavy with moisture and the distinctive tang of lightning-charged atmosphere. Above him, the lighthouse stands defiant against the darkening sky, the everlasting flame already visible as daylight surrenders to premature twilight. Reaching the first of the warning lanterns, a sturdy iron construction protected from the elements by thick glass, Leif produces a striker from his belt pouch. Unlike the miraculous everlasting flame, these mundane lights require conventional fire-starting methods. The lantern wick catches on the third attempt, the small flame dancing wildly until Leif adjusts the protective housing to shield it from the gusting wind. One by one he moves along the coastline, illuminating each warning light until the harbor approach is clearly marked for any vessel desperate or foolish enough to seek shelter in such weather. The final lantern sits atop a natural stone pillar that juts from the water at the harbor's entrance, a particularly hazardous position that requires Leif to time his crossing along a narrow land bridge that submerges during high tide. With the storm rapidly intensifying, seawater already sluices across the rough stone pathway, making each step precarious. Halfway across, a particularly violent gust nearly knocks him sideways into the churning water. Only a lifetime of experience in such conditions allows him to maintain his balance, crouching low until the worst of the gust passes. Reaching the stone pillar, Leif climbs the iron rungs embedded in its side, ascending to the lantern housing at its summit. From this exposed position, he has an unobstructed view of the approaching storm in all its terrifying majesty. The cloud formations he observed earlier have congealed into more definite shapes, enormous figures that lumber across the sky with deliberate malevolence, their features momentarily illuminated by flashes of lightning from within the storm mass reveal the unmistakable characteristics of Jotnar: craggy, inhumanly proportioned faces, massive limbs that end in talon-like appendages, eyes like frozen stars, cold and implacable in their hatred of order and light. "The Wanderer spoke truth," Leif murmurs, quickly lighting the final warning lantern. Its flame seems pitifully small against the cosmic scale of the approaching threat, yet he knows from the ancient records that even the mightiest powers of chaos respect the boundaries established by Njord's gift. The everlasting flame has stood against similar incursions throughout the long centuries, its light penetrating the veils between realms to guide lost souls home and to ward off those entities that would prey upon mortal kind. With his coastal duties completed, Leif begins the arduous journey back to the lighthouse. The wind now howls with voices that sound disturbingly sentient, forming words in an ancient tongue that human vocal cords were never designed to produce. The rain falls horizontally, each droplet striking exposed skin with the sting of tiny needles. Twice he loses his footing on the increasingly treacherous path, saving himself only by grasping desperately at outcroppings of rock or hardy vegetation that somehow maintains its grip on the cliff face. By the time he reaches the lighthouse, darkness has fallen completely despite the early hour. The everlasting flame shines like a defiant star against the chaotic sky, its light somehow more vibrant and purposeful than usual, as if responding to the threat that approaches. Leif pauses at the heavy oak door, turning to face the storm one final time before seeking the relative shelter of his stone tower. What he sees freezes the blood in his veins. Advancing across the surface of the sea comes a procession that belongs to nightmare or ancient legend. Massive humanoid figures stride through the towering waves as easily as a human might walk through tall grass, their bodies composed of ice and stone, their breath visible as plumes of winter frost, despite the relative warmth of the ocean air. Jotnar indeed, but not merely riding the storm as the Wanderer warned. They are the storm, their passage between realms creating atmospheric disturbance as a byproduct of their very existence in Midgard. At their forefront walks a figure both more and less substantial than the others, a Jotun seemingly composed of living frost, its form constantly shifting and reforming as ice crystals dance in complex patterns throughout its massive frame. Unlike its companions, whose expressions reveal only bestial rage or dull malevolence, this being's face holds calculation and intelligence. It pauses in its advance, turning its gaze directly toward the lighthouse, directly toward Leif, with eyes like twin abysses, ancient beyond comprehension and cold beyond measure. Keeper. The word forms in Leif's mind rather than his ears, the same method of communication the Wanderer used, but where the sailor's mental voice carried reassurance, this intrusion brings only dread. Your flame has denied us passage for too long. Tonight, the old barriers fall. Tonight, Midgard remembers the touch of winter unbound. Leif should be terrified beyond rational thought, and part of him is, but generations of keepers have prepared for this moment. His hand closes around the amber amulet at his throat, drawing strength from its familiar warmth. The flame stands, he responds, speaking the ritual words passed down through his lineage. While it burns, Njord's compact holds. While it burns, the boundaries remain. The frost Jotun's expression shifts into something approximating amusement, a terrible sight on features never meant to display human emotion. Brave little mortal, your god of the sea is occupied elsewhere tonight, his attention diverted by greater concerns. It gestures expansively, encompassing the storm and its giant companions. We are but a splinter force, while the main thrust of our kind strikes elsewhere, along Midgard's weakening periphery. This revelation strikes Leif like a physical blow. The lighthouse of Lindisfjord is one of several such structures rumored to exist at strategic points around Midgard's boundaries, each housing a similar flame, each tended by keepers who maintain their solitary vigil, just as he does. If all are under simultaneous assault, there is no time for such considerations. The frost Jotun has resumed its advance, and behind it, its companions have begun to spread out, forming a rough semicircle that will soon envelop the base of the cliff upon which the lighthouse stands. Already, where their massive feet touch land, vegetation withers and stone cracks from sudden extreme cold. Leif retreats inside the lighthouse, securing the door with both the physical iron bar and the rune-inscribed wooden peg that activates additional protective measures. The interior feels preternaturally quiet after the howling chaos outside, though the stone walls vibrate subtly with each thunderclap, or perhaps with each footstep of the approaching giants. He ascends the spiral staircase with greater haste than dignity, nearly losing his footing twice in his rush to reach the flame chamber. The everlasting flame awaits him, burning with reassuring steadiness despite the magical assault that must surely be directed against it. The protection runes he placed earlier continue to glow, their light pulsing in a complex rhythm that suggests they actively repel hostile energies. Leif crosses to the brazier, kneeling before it in the manner of his ancestors. From a concealed pocket within his tunic, he removes a small leather pouch, one that has remained sealed throughout his lifetime, opened only in moments of direst need, according to the records of previous keepers. With fingers that tremble slightly despite his best efforts at calm, he loosens the drawstring and tips the contents into his palm. 3 scales, iridescent and impossibly light, each the size of a small coin. According to keeper lore, they came from a creature that swims the waters between realms, a benevolent entity allied with Njord in ages past. When cast into the everlasting flame during times of greatest peril, they were said to summon... Well, the records were deliberately vague on exactly what they summoned, but the outcome was always the same. The lighthouse remained standing, the flame unextinguished, the boundary between realms secure. A tremendous impact shakes the entire structure, nearly causing Leif to drop the precious scales. The Jotnar have reached the base of the lighthouse, and now begin their assault in earnest. Another impact follows, then another, each accompanied by the sound of cracking stone and the groaning protest of ancient mortar, stressed beyond its limits. Leif steadies himself against the bronze brazier, careful not to touch the flame itself. While it cannot burn human flesh with ordinary fire, contact with such primal magic carries other risks. With solemn purpose, he casts the first scale into the heart of the everlasting flame. The effect is immediate and dramatic. The flame surges upward, changing color from its usual golden blue to a deep, oceanic teal that fills the entire chamber with its otherworldly radiance. The light pulses outward in a visible wave that passes through solid stone as if it were insubstantial, expanding in an ever-widening circle from the lighthouse's position. Outside, the assault falters momentarily as the Jotnar react to this unexpected development. Leif can hear their voices, those terrible, ancient voices, crying out in a mixture of surprise and rage. The Frost Jotun's mental presence returns, hammering against Leif's consciousness with far less composure than before. What have you done, Keeper? What ancient compact have you invoked? Leif offers no response, knowing that engagement would only provide the entity with greater access to his mind. Instead, he focuses entirely on the everlasting flame, drawing comfort from its renewed vigor. The first scale has bought time, but the historical records suggest that all three will be needed to fully repel an incursion of this magnitude. The assault resumes with redoubled fury. The entire lighthouse shudders continuously now, as multiple Jotnar bring their strength to bear against its foundation. Small fragments of stone break free from the ceiling of the flame chamber, pattering around Leif like solid raindrops. A particularly violent impact cracks one of the thick glass panes that enclose the upper portion of the chamber, allowing the storm's fury to intrude, wind and rain whipping around the room in chaotic pattern. Leif casts the second scale into the flame. Again, the light surges and changes, shifting now to a deep purple shot through with threads of silver, reminiscent of the night sky during the rare celestial alignments that occur once in a generation. This light does not pulse outward like the first, but seems to contract inward, drawing itself back into the flame, in a motion that defies natural law. The effect creates a momentary vacuum that pulls at Leif's clothing and steals the breath from his lungs before stabilizing. Outside, a new sound rises above the storm and the Jotnar's assault, a low, musical tone like a giant horn blown beneath the waves. It comes from the direction of the open sea, beyond the harbor, beyond the reach of the lighthouse's normal illumination. The Jotnar hear it too. Their attacks falter again, this time accompanied by confused bellowing and what might almost be interpreted as concern. Impossible, the Frost Jotun's voice intrudes into Leif's mind again, weaker now, tinged with uncertainty. The Guardians of the Deep were bound by oath never to interfere in the surface realms again. What price have you paid for their intervention, Keeper? What sacrifice has purchased their attention? Again, Leif offers no response. In truth, he has no answer to give. The nature of the scales, the entities they summon, the ancient pacts involved, these are mysteries beyond his knowledge, details lost to time or deliberately obscured by keepers long dead. He knows only what has been passed down through generations. In direst need, cast the scales. When the scales are cast, stand firm by the flame, unwavering in purpose and faith. The horn sounds again, closer now, accompanied by a disturbance in the sea visible even through the damaged window of the flame chamber. Something massive moves beneath the surface, something that displaces enough water to create a visible bulge in the ocean itself. A traveling mound of displaced liquid that advances directly toward the shore, where the Jotnar now stand in visible confusion. Leif reaches for the third and final scale, but hesitates as a new presence makes itself known. This mental touch is neither the adversarial intrusion of the Frost Jotun, nor the cryptic communication of the Wanderer. It carries an impression of vast age and immense patience, of depths beyond human comprehension, and wisdom beyond mortal reckoning. It does not communicate in words, but in concepts that unfold in Leif's mind like complex origami, revealing new understandings with each subtle shift. The core of its message becomes clear. The third scale should be preserved if possible. Its use would indeed drive back the current assault completely, but at a cost. The summoning of entities whose very presence in Midgard might cause greater disruption than the Jotnar themselves. The two scales already cast have activated certain ancient agreements, bringing defenders adequate to the current threat. To use the third would be to escalate beyond necessity. Leaf acknowledges this wisdom, returning the final scale to its pouch with careful reverence. As if responding to his decision, the everlasting flame stabilizes into a new configuration, still enhanced by the two scales' influence, but no longer pulsing with potentially catastrophic power. Its light extends outward in a focused beam that passes through the broken window and illuminates the scene below with perfect clarity. The Jotnar have abandoned their assault on the lighthouse and now stand in disarray at the shoreline, weapons of ice and stone raised against the advancing disturbance in the water. The frost Jotnar gesticulates with elaborate motions that suggest complex spellcasting, ice crystals swirling around its massive form in intricate patterns. From beneath the waves rise figures that defy easy description. Not quite humanoid, not entirely aquatic. Their forms suggest ancestors common to both merfolk and the Aesir themselves. Their skin gleams with the same iridescence as the scales Leaf cast into the flame, shifting through impossible colors with each movement. They wield weapons of coral and pearl, impossibly delicate in appearance, yet clearly capable of inflicting grievous damage, even upon Jotun flesh, as evidenced by the wounds already visible on the nearest giants. These must be the guardians of the deep mentioned in the Frost Jotun's desperate mental outcry, entities bound by ancient pact to Njord, and by extension to the protection of the boundaries between realms. Their arrival transforms what had been a one-sided assault into a balanced conflict, the Jotnar's numerical advantage offset by the Guardian's evident magical superiority and intimate connection to the surrounding ocean. The battle that unfolds below the lighthouse transcends mortal combat in both scale and strangeness. The Jotar conjure weapons of primal ice that shatter against shields composed of solidified reef organisms. The Guardians manipulate water itself as a weapon, creating momentary constructs of impossible complexity that strike with fluid precision before dissolving back into the wave. The Frost Jotun leads its companions with tactical acumen that suggests centuries of battlefield experience, while the Guardians move with the synchronized precision of beings who share consciousness at some fundamental level. Throughout this otherworldly conflict, the everlasting flame continues to cast its enhanced light upon the scene, and Leif begins to understand another aspect of the lighthouse's purpose. It is not merely a ward against incursion, not simply a guide for lost souls or wayward vessels. It is a beacon that reveals truth, that dispels illusion and deception, preventing either side from employing the shadowed magics that might otherwise spiral beyond control. In the flame's unflinching illumination, the conflict remains contained, prevents collateral destruction that might devastate the mortal settlements beyond the lighthouse's range. As the battle reaches its crescendo, Leif remains at his post beside the flame, occasionally adding the sacred oil when necessary, maintaining the protective rune circle, fulfilling his duty as keeper through this extraordinary circumstance, just as he does through ordinary days. Hours pass in this state of heightened vigilance, though time feels distorted, stretched and compressed by the proximity of beings who experience its passage differently than mortals. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide of conflict turns. The Jotnar find themselves increasingly outmaneuvered, their ice magics less effective as the Guardians adapt to their patterns, their physical advantages negated by the Guardians' superior mobility in the coastal environment. The Frost Jotun recognizes defeat before its companions, its calculating intelligence evident in its decision to retreat, while organized withdrawal remains possible. This victory is temporary, Keeper. Its mental voice reaches Leif one final time, distance already weakening the projection. The boundaries thin across all Midgard. Your flame, all the flames, cannot burn forever. Then it is gone, leading its surviving companions back across the turbulent water, their massive forms gradually dissolving into the storm clouds from which they emerged. The Guardians do not pursue beyond a certain point, respecting some invisible boundary known only to them. Instead, they gather at the harbor entrance, their iridescent forms creating a display of light and color that rivals the everlasting flame itself in beauty. One among them, distinguished by elaborate patterns that spiral across its otherwise humanoid torso, separates from the group and approaches the lighthouse directly. It pauses at the base of the cliff, looking upward to where Leaf stands watching from the flame chamber. A gesture of acknowledgement passes between them, keeper and guardian, each recognizing the other's role in maintaining the balance between realms. No words are exchanged, yet Leif understands that a promise has been made. The Guardians will strengthen their patrols along this section of boundary, their vigilance increased in response to the growing threats from beyond Midgard. In return, they expect the lighthouse to stand, the flame to burn, the keeper to maintain the ancient compact established when Njord first gifted the everlasting flame to mortal guardianship. With this silent agreement confirmed, the Guardian rejoins its companions, and together they slip beneath the waves as smoothly and completely as if they had never existed at all. The storm, no longer driven by Jotun presence, begins to dissipate naturally, clouds breaking apart to reveal glimpses of star-strewn sky beyond. Leif releases a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the tension of hours draining from his body all at once. He sinks to his knees beside the brazier, not in supplication but simple exhaustion. The everlasting flame has returned to its normal appearance, the effects of the scales apparently temporary, but its light seems somehow more meaningful to him now, its purpose clearer than through all his years of service. Dawn arrives with uncharacteristic gentleness for this typically harsh coastline. Sunlight spills across the horizon in delicate gradations of pink and gold, illuminating a seascape washed clean by the night's tumult. No physical evidence remains of the confrontation between cosmic forces. No Jotun footprints in the soil. No strange weapons left behind. No bodies of fallen combatants from either side. Only the lighthouse itself bears witness to what transpired, with its cracked foundation stones and the broken window in the flame chamber. Leif begins the work of repairs immediately after performing his morning ritual with the flame. Such maintenance is part of a keeper's duty, tasks passed down through generations alongside the more mystical responsibilities. He knows precisely how to mix the mortar that will bind the foundation stones once more, how to measure and cut replacement glass for the damaged window, how to reseal the protective runes where storm damage has weakened their efficacy. This practical work occupies his hands, while his mind processes the events of the previous night, integrating this new experience into his understanding of his role as keeper. By midday, the most critical repairs are complete, and Leif allows himself a moment of rest on the small shelf of rock that extends from the lighthouse's base on its seaward side. From here, he can observe the now placid ocean stretching to the horizon, its surface occasionally broken by the passage of ordinary seabirds or the leap of mundane fish. No sign remains of either Jotnar or Guardians, of ancient conflicts or primordial powers. A familiar shape appears in the sky above, Hugin, the seabird, returning after wisely absenting himself during the night's dangers. He lands on a nearby outcropping, regarding Leif with those unnaturally intelligent eyes, before preening his storm-ruffled feathers with elaborate unconcern. "You missed quite the spectacle, old friend," Leif comments conversationally. though perhaps you observed from a safer distance, wiser than I if so. The bird makes that sound again, half caw, half chuckle, and hops closer, head tilted inquisitively. For a wild moment, Leif considers the possibility that this creature might actually respond with human speech, that after all these years of one-sided conversations, the previous night's thinning of boundaries might have changed the rules of what is possible. But Hugin remains stubbornly avian for all his unusual characteristics, and Leif finds himself oddly comforted by this small piece of normality reasserting itself. As afternoon transitions toward evening, Leif returns to his regular duties with renewed purpose. He charts the passing of 2 merchant vessels on the horizon, noting their description and direction in the great record book. He prepares a simple meal, savoring the routine task after hours of cosmic significance. He cleans and refills the oil reservoirs for the coastal warning lanterns, though he does not light them yet in the clear weather. When dusk finally arrives, Leif climbs once more to the flame chamber for the evening ritual. The everlasting flame requires no lighting, no protection from the encroaching darkness. But tradition dictates acknowledgement of the transition from day to night. He stands before the brazier, amulet in hand, and speaks the words his grandmother taught him, words that keepers have spoken since time immemorial. Between day and night, between light and darkness, between known and unknown, the flame stands as boundary and guide. May all souls seeking safe harbor find their way by its light. May all entities of malice be turned aside by its power. In Njord's name and by the compact of the ancient days, let the flame burn eternal. As the final syllable leaves his lips, Leif becomes aware of a presence behind him. Not the intrusive mental touch of the Frostjotun or the oceanic vastness of the Guardians, but a physical presence in the chamber itself. He turns slowly, prepared for almost anything after the events of the previous night. The Wanderer stands beside the broken window, still under repair, his form more substantial than during his appearance before the storm. In the flame's steady light, details previously obscured become visible. The intricate knotwork patterns engraved on his mail, the weather-lined features of a face that has witnessed centuries of storms, the slight curve of what might be either smile or grimace partially hidden in his sea-foam beard. The lighthouse stands, the Wanderer observes, his voice audible now rather than projected directly into Leif's mind. It carries the rhythmic cadence of waves against shore, the depth of underwater trenches, the salt tang of ocean winds. The keeper endures, the flame burns. All as it should be. Leif inclines his head in acknowledgement, sensing that more formal obeisance would be unwelcome. We were forewarned, he responds simply, and not abandoned when the warning proved true. The Wanderer's almost smile deepens slightly. Njord honors his commitments, keeper, whatever the frost giant may have claimed. The old god's attention may be divided in these troubled times, but never absent where his responsibilities lie. The implication hangs in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. The Wanderer is more than messenger or observer. He is Njord himself in one of his many aspects, reduced to a form that can interact directly with the mortal realm without causing the disruption that a god's full presence would inevitably create. The third scale remains unused, Leif says after a moment, uncertain whether explanation or justification is required. Wisely so, the Wanderer replies with an approving nod. The Deep One's answer to the first 2 calls is bound by ancient oath. The third summons entities unfettered by such constraints, necessary only in the direst circumstance. He moves to the brazier, passing his hand through the everlasting flame without apparent effect. You have learned the Keeper's wisdom, that power available is not always power that should be employed. Leaf absorbs this confirmation of his intuition with quiet satisfaction. The frost Jotun spoke of boundaries thinning across all Midgard. He ventures after a moment, of other lighthouses facing similar assaults. Truth spoken from malicious intent remains truth. Njord acknowledges, his expression darkening like a sudden squall across calm waters. The cycle turns, Keeper. The time between Ragnarok spirals toward its nadir once more. The old enemies grow bold, testing defenses, seeking weakness. He turns his gaze directly upon Leaf, those fieldy days reflecting the everlasting flame's light. But they've found none here. Remember that in the darker days to come. Before Leaf can respond, can ask any of the 1,000 questions that arise from these cryptic statements, the god aspect gestures toward the horizon where the first stars now appear in the darkening sky. Your counterparts at the other anchor points held firm as well, each in their own manner. The lighthouses stand, the flames burn, the boundaries hold. His form begins to lose definition around the edges, merging once more with the sea air that enters through the broken window. For now, that is victory enough. Then he is gone, not with dramatic fanfare, but with the simple inevitability of tide retreating from shore, leaving Leaf alone with the everlasting flame, and the weight of responsibility both lightened and deepened by this direct divine acknowledgement. Night settles fully over Lindisfjord, stars emerging in their thousands across the clear sky, their reflections creating mirror images in the unusually calm sea below. From the flame chamber, Leaf watches this celestial display with renewed appreciation for his solitary role. Though separate from the communities of fellow humans, he stands as part of something vaster, a lineage of keepers stretching backward through time and forward into unknown futures, each maintaining their lonely vigil against cosmic darkness. He adds a final entry to the record book before seeking his bed. Storm past, flame steady, repairs underway, the lighthouse stands. Simple words that carry the weight of continuity, of duty fulfilled, of boundaries maintained between what is and what should not be. As sleep claims him, Leif Njordsson, keeper of the lighthouse at the edge of Midgard, rests in the knowledge that while the everlasting flame burns, his watch continues. While his watch continues, the flame burns, an unbroken circle of light and purpose that stretches from the ancient days when gods walked freely among mortals to whatever future awaits beyond the horizon of his understanding. The lighthouse stands, the keeper endures, the flame burns eternal. Our Viking tale has now concluded. You will now hear the peaceful sounds of a crackling fire and gentle ambient noises that will continue throughout the night without any interruptions, helping you drift into a deep and restful sleep. May the stars of the northern sky watch over you, and may you find peaceful rest until the morning light. Sleep well, and good night.